Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, permit me to begin by expressing my personal appreciation and that of the African Petroleum Producers Organization to His Excellency President João Lourenço and his team for doing what I have always believed Africa's leaders should do for the oil and gas industry. I go to conferences in APPO member countries, and each time I see a president of an APPO member country coming to grace the opening of such meetings, I say that yes, that country is ready for the oil and gas business. They mean it. It's not enough for ministers, captains of the industry to come and be talking about, we are ready. Show it by the presence of the highest authority. I commend His Excellency for that. Now, the theme of this year's edition of the AOG 2025 is Angola at 50, oil and gas as a development factor. How much has oil and gas contributed to Angola's development in the last 50 years? And how much more can it contribute in the next 50 years? Speaking about Angola's Golden Jubilee, I believe that everyone in this audience and outside will agree with me when I say that APPO founder member country, the Republic of Angola, is one of the very few countries on the African continent that has every reason to observe the annual rituals of the celebration of national independence. Angola has reason to celebrate independence because its people fought dearly for it. That the struggle for Angola's independence was not fought on the Angolan soil alone, nor by the MPLA alone. Students of various universities and colleges across Africa, especially Nigeria, were fully involved in the struggle, opting for 001, 010, or even 000 to support the struggles. I recall the famous Africa Has Come of Age speech delivered by General Murtala Mohammed on January 11, 1976, at the extraordinary summit of the AOU in Addis Ababa, when some foreign powers wanted to scuttle the hard-won independence of the Angolan people, where General Mohammed said, and I quote, "Africa has come of age. It is no longer under the orbit of any extracontinental power. It should no longer take orders from any country, however powerful. The fortunes of Africa are ours to make or to mar. For too long, we have been kicked around. For too long, we have been treated like adolescents who cannot discern their interests and act accordingly. For too long, it has been presumed that the African needs outside experts to tell him who are his friends and who are his enemies. The time has come when we should make it clear that we can decide for ourselves, that we know our own interests and how to protect those interests, that we are capable of resolving African problems without presumptuous lessons in ideological dangers, which more often than not have no relevance for us, nor for the problem at hand." This was General Murtala Mohammed in 1976, 1 year after Angola had gotten its independence. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, 70 years since commercial oil discovery was made in Kwanza Basin of Angola how much independence does Angola have over its oil and gas resources? How much of the financing of the oil and gas industry is done by Angola and Angolans? How much of the technology of the industry is controlled by Angola and Angolans? And how much of the oil and gas produced by Angola is used to energize the Angolan people and its economy, as well as Angola neighboring countries? These are not pleasant questions to ask in a forum like this. But what I say about Angola applies to all African oil and gas producing countries in varying degrees. In other words, Angola is a metaphor. What I have described about Angola equally applies to virtually all the oil and gas producing countries on the African continent. Your Excellencies, this situation cannot be allowed to continue unabated. The global paradigm shift away from fossil fuels to renewable energies, euphemistically called the energy transition, has taught us that it is unwise to rely on others in order to be able to exploit what God has endowed us with and what has become critical to our national economies. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the African Petroleum Producers Organization is fully conscious of these serious challenges facing the African oil and gas industry and is taking practical measures to address them. Speaking about practical measures, one such measure was taken in this very city of Luanda 3 years ago, when in the august presence of His Excellency Lorenzo, President of the Republic, the APPO Ministerial Council, under the presidency of Angola's Minister of Mineral Resources, Petroleum and Gas, His Excellency Diamantino Pedro Azevedo, approved the signing of an MOU between Afrexim and APPO for the establishment of the Africa Energy Bank, AEB. I'm pleased to announce that all works on this establishment of the bank have been concluded and that the next extraordinary session of the APPO Ministerial Council shall be presented with a proposed date for the launch of the bank that has been agreed by the founding institutions for its consideration and approval and formal announcement. Let me once again express my personal appreciation and those of the stakeholders in the African Energy Bank project and indeed the African continent to members of the APPO Ministerial Council for taking bold and practical steps to address this imminent challenge which the energy transition has posed to the African oil and gas industry. Permit me to especially appreciate Minister Diamantino, then President of the APPO Ministerial Council, for his foresight and commitment to the project, evidenced in giving anticipatory approval for the Secretariat to begin discussions with Afrexim Bank even before the matter was tabled before the APPO Ministerial Council. I should like to use this opportunity to appeal to all who believe that Africa's destiny should lie in the hands of Africans to partner with us to grow the Africa Energy Bank, whose main objective is to wean our oil and gas industry from undue dependence on foreign capital for upstream, midstream, and downstream sectors of the industry. To paraphrase General Mohammed of blessed memory, the African oil and gas industry has come of age. Africa cannot continue to be dependent on external powers for the finance, technology, and markets of its oil and gas, especially in a world where those on whom we have been dependent on for several decades decided to abandon us in our hours of need. Africa must control the finances of its oil and gas industry. Africa must develop the technology of the industry, and Africa must create the energy market that will enable the 1 billion Africans living without access to energy to have access to energy. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, is it not an irony that the continent with the largest proportion of the world's population living with no access to modern energy is also the same continent exporting 75% of its oil and 45% of its gas to others. For too long, we have been made to believe that there is no market for energy in Africa because Africans are too poor to buy energy. Because there is no internal market and the people are considered too poor to purchase energy, oil and gas are treated as export commodity, and all the infrastructure for the industry are export-oriented. That explains why, until fairly recently, almost all the pipelines you see across the continent ran from the fields to the seaports for export. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, what we are not told is that markets just don't develop from the blues. Markets are consciously and deliberately created. And this is another project that APPO is focused on doing. Together with CABEF, the Central Africa Business Energy Forum, APPO is championing the building of comprehensive pipeline system across the Central Africa sub-region, what we call the CAPS. Just last week, ministers of CEMAC met in Malabo and endorsed the project and decided that they were comfortable with the work done so far to merit the consideration and approval of the Summit of Heads of State of CEMAC countries, scheduled to take place in Bangui on the 10th of this month. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, let me restate what APPO has consistently said since the reform from APA to APPO. The future of the oil and gas industry in Africa lies in greater cooperation and collaboration among African oil and gas producers, in looking first within the continent to find solutions to the imminent challenges posed to us by energy transition, namely financing, technology, and markets, and then looking outside only to supplement what we can do by ourselves. I thank you for your kind attention.